Welcome back to Oliver's Stories. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about the life of America's first billionaire, John D. Rockefeller, a man whose name once made the world tremble, not because he was a king or a conqueror, but because he built an empire so vast, so ruthless, and so powerful that it changed the very nature of American business forever. From desperate poverty to unimaginable wealth, his story is one of hunger, ambition, and a fortune that would reach over $400 billion in today's money. It is pre-dawn, in upstate New York, 1845. The bitter cold seeps through the cracks in the wooden walls of the farmhouse. You are stirring awake on your corn husk mattress. The scratchy wool blanket barely keeps the chill at bay. Your body knows it is time to get up. Farm work waits for no one. Not even a 6-year-old kid. The first thing that hits you is the hunger. Not the normal kind of hunger you might feel now, lying in your comfortable bed. This is the hollow, constant ache of someone who never quite gets enough food. Your stomach is making that weird gurgling noise again. You are John D. Rockefeller, and right now you are about as far from a billionaire as humanly possible. The floor is ice cold against your bare feet as you climb out of bed. No central heating here. Just a faint glow from the kitchen hearth that barely touches the corners of the house. Your breath comes out in visible puffs. A rooster crows outside, and you hear your mother already moving around, probably saying her morning prayers. The Rockefellers are strict Baptists. God comes before breakfast. Always. John, time to fetch water. Your mother's voice calls from the kitchen. She sounds tired. She is always tired. This is not like your warm bathroom with running water and indoor plumbing. You are about to grab a wooden bucket and walk to the well, break the ice on top, and haul that water back to the house. Your arms will ache halfway there. Your fingers will go numb. Unless you do it, nobody drinks or washes today. This was daily life for the richest man in American history. Weird to think about, right? The Rockefeller family was not exactly living the high life. Their farmhouse was barely holding together. The clothes they wore were patched and repatched, and everybody was hungry pretty much all the time. But here is where it gets interesting. While you are hauling that water back to the house, your mind is already working. Even at 6 years old, you are thinking about money differently than other kids. Like when you found that turkey nest in the woods last week. Remember that? You followed a wild turkey through the trees, watched where it went, and discovered its eggs. Most kids would have just taken the eggs for breakfast. Not you. You carefully gathered them up and brought them home to hatch. Why? Because a few turkeys could be sold for more than a bunch of eggs. You are already thinking about investments, about delayed gratification, about growing wealth. At 6, John, did you collect those eggs like I asked? Your mother is looking at you. Dark circles under her eyes. Yes, Mom. And I have been thinking, you say, your voice small but determined. If we let some hatch, we could raise more turkeys and sell them at market for more money. She gives you a tired smile. Always with the schemes, are you? The turkey thing is not just a cute story. It actually happened. Little John Rockefeller was hustling poultry before most kids learned to tie their shoes. He sold those turkeys for a tidy profit and then immediately started thinking about how to grow that little bit of money. So, what made John different? Why was this kid destined to become absurdly, disgustingly rich when his neighbors were all stuck in the same poverty? Part of it was his father, but not in the way you might think. Where is father? You ask, already knowing the answer. Your mother's face tightens. Business, she says simply. He will be back when I can. The adults call your father Devil Bill behind his back. And it is not just because of his charm. William Avery Rockefeller is what people in the 1840s politely called a scoundrel, what they less politely called a complete waste of skin. He is off somewhere right now, selling fake medicine to desperate people, calling himself Dr. William Livingston. He peddles bottles of mysterious liquid that supposedly cures cancer, fixes broken bones, makes you irresistible to the opposite sex, and probably whitens your teeth while it is at it. Imagine growing up knowing your dad is basically a con artist. That is John's childhood. He said he would be back with money, your mother says, but her voice lacks conviction. Sometimes Bill does come back with money. He will show up in the middle of the night, roaring drunk, tossing candy to the kids, and pressing cash into your mother's reluctant hands. He will stay for a week, maybe two, being loud and charming, and filling the house with his presence. NCE. Then he will vanish again, sometimes for months. Your stomach rumbles as you chew on a piece of dry bread for breakfast. Your father has been gone for 6 weeks now. The money he left behind ran out 3 weeks ago. I am going to check the turkey eggs, you announce. Your mother nods. Outside in the rickety coop you built yourself, 3 turkey eggs are starting to crack. You watch, fascinated, as tiny beaks poke through. This is literally your investment hatching in front of you. Your mind races with calculations, how much you can sell them for, how many more you could breed, how long it would take to double your money. You are 6 years old, standing in the freezing cold, watching turkey eggs hatch, and thinking about compound interest. That is not normal, the weirdest part. While Bill is off being the worst, John develops an almost obsessive honesty. It is as if the moral pendulum swung completely in the opposite direction. His mother drilled religious values into him, and he took to them with scary intensity. Waste not, want not, she would say, scraping every last molecule of food from her plate. A penny saved is a penny earned, as she carefully recorded every single expense in her little book. These were not just cute sayings to John, they were survival. They were the difference between eating and going hungry. But then something happens that changes everything. You are 10 years old now. It is 1849, and the entire town is whispering. Your father has been accused of something bad, something involving a young woman. The details are kept from the children, but you see your mother crying when she thinks no one is looking. Within days, you are packing your meager belongings. The family has to leave town. The disgrace is too much. Where are we going? You ask your mother. Moravia, she says. We are starting over. Starting over becomes a pattern. The Rockefellers move from town to town, always one step ahead of Bill's reputation. And with each move, or responsibility falls on young John's shoulders. By 12, he is basically running the family finances. By 14, he is making loans to neighbors. With interest, of course. John's account books from when he was a teenager still exist. This kid was meticulously tracking every penny that came in and went out. He would loan a neighbor 50 cents and note the 7% interest due in a month. He was a human calculator before calculators existed. Finally, the family settles in Cleveland, Ohio. It is 1855, and you are 16 years old. Your father's visits have become even rarer. He has another family now, a whole secret wife and life that your mother does not know about. She never will. I need to find work, you tell your mother one evening. Real work. You have been helping on the farm, selling turkeys, doing odd jobs for years. But college is not an option. There are 5 kids in the family now, and someone has to put food on the table. That someone is you. What kind of W? Or, John? She asks. You straighten your carefully mended jacket. I am going to work for a merchant or a bank. Somewhere I can learn about business. The next morning, you make a list of every substantial business in Cleveland. You put on your one good shirt, slick down your hair, and set out with absolute determination. Your first stop is the railroad office. You walk in, back straight, voice steady despite your youth. I would like to apply for a position as a bookkeeper. You tell the man at the desk. He looks up, sees a skinny 16-year-old, and literally laughs in your face. Son, you are not even old enough to shave. Come back in 5 years. This happens at the next place too, and the next, and the next. How old are you? The bank manager asks incredulously. 16, sir. But I am good with numbers. Very good. He is already shaking his head. Come back when you are a man. 6 weeks. 6 long weeks of rejection. Every morning you get up, put on that same shirt, and try again. Most people would have given up after the first 10 rejections. You are on number 30-something and still going. Then, on September 26, 1855, you walk into Hewitt and Tuttle, a small produce commission firm. They need a bookkeeper. You show them your handwriting, which is impeccable. You demonstrate your quick mental math. Can you start today? The owner asks. You blink, surprised. Yes, sir. Right now, sir. Good. Get to work. He does not mention salary. For the rest of his life, John Rockefeller celebrated September 26th as Job Day, not his birthday, not Christmas, this day. The day he got his foot in the door of the business world. He considered it the most important day of his life. The work is grueling. You are at the office from 7 in the morning until often 9 or 10 at night. Your eyes burn from squinting at columns of numbers. Your fingers are permanently stained with ink. But you are learning. Every transaction, every negotiation, every business practice, you are absorbing it all like a sponge. One day, your boss comes in with a check for $4,000, a staggering sum in 1855. He puts it in the safe and leaves for lunch. You know the combination. When he is gone, you open the safe just to hold the check in your hands. You stare at it, mesmerized by what it represents. I am bound to be rich, you whisper to yourself. Bound to be rich. This becomes your daily mantra. Every morning before work, you look in the mirror and repeat, I am bound to be rich. Not hoping, not wanting, bound. As if it is already decided, just waiting to happen. After 3 months, you finally get your first payment. $50 for 3 months of work. That is about 50 cents a day. But your bosses are impressed with your dedication. They raise your salary to $300 per year, roughly $11,000 in today's money. It is not much, but it is enough for independence, enough to help support your mother and siblings, and even with this tiny income, you immediately begin giving 10% to charity, something you will continue doing for the rest of your life. It is strange to think of the ultimate capitalist robber baron as charitable, but there are actual church records showing John's donations from when he was making basically nothing. The guy was complicated. For 2 years, you work your fingers to the bone at Hewitt and Tuttle. You master every aspect of the business, but then the economy slows down, and one of the partners quits. Suddenly, all his responsibilities fall on you. But your salary does not increase. You start to see the writing on the wall. The business is struggling. It might not survive much longer. Most people would panic. You see opportunity. In your boarding house, you have become friends with a chemist named Morris Clark, who works nearby. He is 28. You are just 18. But you have impressed him with your business knowledge and work ethic. One evening, over a simple dinner. Morris leans forward. I have been thinking of starting my own produce commission business, but I need a partner who understands the books. You do not hesitate. I am your man. You would need to invest $2,000, Morris says. Can you raise it? $2,000 in 1857 was no small sum, about $70,000 today. You have been saving every penny, but it is nowhere near enough. I will find a way, you say with absolute confidence, and somehow, you do. You cobble together savings and loans. You approach people with such certainty that they cannot help but believe in you. At 19 years old, you become co-owner of Clark and Rockefeller, a produce commission merchant. From farm boy to business owner in 3 years. The early days are brutal. You and Morris work from dawn until midnight. You travel constantly, meeting with farmers and merchants, building connections. Your feet develop blisters on top of blisters. You sometimes sleep on sacks of grain with. And there is no time to go home. But the business grows and grows. Here is the crazy part. You need more capital to expand, so you come up with this absolutely wild strategy. You go around Cleveland publicly saying that Clark and Rockefeller is looking to invest $10,000 in something. You do not have anywhere near that money, but you create the impression of success, and it works. Banks suddenly want to lend to you. The successful-looking business gets the credit it needs to actually become successful. It is basically fake it till you make it, 1850s style. Then the Civil War breaks out. As a devout Baptist, you strongly oppose slavery. The Union cause matters to you. But you also have 6 mouths to feed at home. Your mother and siblings still rely on your income. So, instead of enlisting yourself, you pay $300 for a substitute soldier. This was legal back then. And you even equip several more Union soldiers out of your own pocket. Meanwhile, the war created an economic boom in the northern states. Cleveland becomes a strategic location for the Union. Food prices inflate dramatically. Your produce business quadruples almost overnight. By 1862, you and Morris clear a profit of $17,000. Over $500,000 in today's money. Not bad for a 23-year-old who started with nothing. But something even bigger is about to land in your lap. One evening, a man named Samuel Andrews comes to your office. He is a young English chemist with an interesting proposition. Before electricity, people lit their homes with oil lamps. Traditionally, this oil came from whales. But whaling was expensive and difficult, and some whale species were being hunted to near extinction. But in 1859, people had discovered you could extract rock oil, or petroleum, by drilling into the ground. And it burned just as well as whale oil. Andrews has a secret process for refining this crude oil using sulfuric acid, turning it into methane called kerosene, which burns cleaner and brighter than regular oil. He needs investors to build a refinery in Cleveland, which is conveniently located just a day's ride from the Pennsylvania oil regions. You and Morris look at each other. You have money to spare now, thanks to the war boom. Why not diversify? You lend Andrews $4,000 to set up his refinery, considering it a side venture while you continue with your produce business. But within a year, something unexpected happens. The oil refinery starts making more money than your main business. A lot more money. We need to talk. You tell Morris one day. Ledgers spread open before you both. Look at these numbers. The oil business is wildly profitable, but it is also unstable and risky. The supply fluctuates dramatically. Sometimes there is so much oil that prices crash to 10 cents a barrel. Other times, it seems like the oil fields are drying up and prices soar to $14. Many people think oil is just a temporary fad that will soon run out. But you see something different. You see the future. We should sell the produce business, you say. Go all in on oil. Morris stares at you like you have lost your mind. That is insane. The produce business is stable. Oil could be gone tomorrow. Oil is not going anywhere. You say with that eerie certainty that has become your trademark. This is just the beginning. The argument goes back and forth for weeks. Finally, Morris agrees to switch to oil, but he is nervous. The volatility of the market keeps him up at night. And then, in 1865, after a particularly rough patch in the oil business, Morris reaches his breaking point. I want out, he tells you. Buy my share. The price he names is $72,500, about $1.35 million in today's money. It is a fortune. And to buy him out, you will need to go into significant debt. Everyone thinks you are crazy to take on this risk. The oil business is too unpredictable, too dangerous. You could lose everything. But that same day, news arrives from Pennsylvania. A massive new oil field has been discovered. The market is about to be flooded with crude oil. Most refiners see this as a disaster. Prices will crash again. You see it differently. You see opportunity where others see catastrophe. I will buy your share, you tell Morris. Your voice steady despite the fear you are feeling inside. You are 26 years old. You have just gone all in on one of the riskiest industries in America. And now, you need to find a way to crush your competition if you want to survive. The foundation of the world's greatest fortune was about to be laid, and it all started with that scared, hungry kid on a corn husk mattress. But how John Rockefeller went from ambitious young businessman to the most feared monopolist in American history, that is where things get really interesting. The morning sun filters through the window of your small Cleveland office. It is 1867, and you are staring at your ledger books with intense concentration. You have renamed the company Standard Oil, and you are plotting domination while most of your competitors are just trying to survive. This is what is wild about John Rockefeller. While everyone else saw the oil business as chaotic and unpredictable, he saw patterns, opportunity. He had this freakish ability to look at the same market everyone else was looking at and see something completely different. You push back from your desk and walk to the large map on your wall. Small red pins mark every competing refinery in Cleveland. Blue pins show the railroad routes. Green pins indicate your growing network of buyers and suppliers. To you, this is not just a map, it is a battlefield. Mr. Rockefeller, your clerk knocks softly. Mr. Flagler is here to see you, and this is where the story takes a turn. Henry Flagler enters your office, and you immediately stand to greet him. He is about 10 years older than you, impeccably dressed, and radiates confidence. But there is something else about him, a certain ruthlessness in his eyes that matches your own. "John," he says with a firm handshake, "I have been looking at your operation. Impressive for a young man." "Thank you," you reply, gesturing for him to sit. "But I have plans for much more." What most people do not realize is that Rockefeller did not build his empire alone. Henry Flagler was just as important to the creation of Standard Oil as John was. The two men were eerily similar: religious, disciplined, detail-oriented. But Flagler had one quality that would change everything. He approached business like it was war. "The problem with this industry," Flagler says, leaning forward in his chair, "is that there are too many players, too much competition. It drives prices down, makes the whole business unstable." You nod. "Exactly my thinking." "So what is the solution?" Flagler asks, though his smile suggests he already knows your answer. Consolidation, you say without hesitation. One company large enough to control the market. Stable prices, predictable supplies." Flagler's smile widens. "And who do you think should be that company?" You do not blink. Standard Oil. This partnership between Rockefeller and Flagler was genuinely terrifying for their competitors. These guys were not just trying to build a successful business. They were systematically planning to eliminate everyone else in the industry. So, it is early 1868, and you are sitting in your office with Flagler, mapping out a strategy that would make Machiavelli blush. "The railroads are our key," Flagler says, tracing a finger along the rail lines on your map. "They are desperate for consistent business, and this is where things get crafty." At the time, oil was transported by train, and three major railroad companies dominated the routes: the New York Central, the Erie, and the Pennsylvania Railroad. Flagler explains his idea. "What if we guarantee them a certain volume of shipments? In exchange, they give us a special rate, a secret rate." Your eyes narrow. "How much lower than the official rate?" Flagler grins. "Half, perhaps less." "So, let me explain what is happening here, because it is kind of brilliant and kind of evil." Rockefeller and Flagler are about to negotiate what were called railroad rebates. Basically, they would pay the official shipping rate that everyone else paid, but then the railroad would secretly give them back a portion of that money, like a discount no one else knew about. Their plan was simple but devastating. 1. Get secret shipping discounts from the railroads. 2. Undercut all competitors on price since their costs are lower. 3. When competitors go bankrupt, buy their refineries for pennies on the dollar. 4. Repeat until you control everything. Within months, you have negotiated deals with both the New York Central and the Erie railroads. In exchange for guaranteed daily shipments, Standard Oil get as a 75% discount on the official rates. Your competitors are paying 24.40 cents per barrel shipped. You are paying around 60 cents. Of course, these deals are kept strictly secret. If your competitors knew, they would demand the same rates or complain to the government. The actual meeting with the railroad executives was something straight out of a movie. Picture this: a private room in Cleveland's most exclusive hotel. cigar smoke hanging thick in the air. Four men, you, Flagler, and two railroad executives, huddled around a small table, speaking in hushed tones. Gentlemen, you say, your voice soft but commanding. Standard Oil can guarantee you 60 carloads of refined oil every day, without fail. The railroad men exchange glances. That kind of consistent volume is unprecedented. In exchange, Flagler continues, we require special consideration on rates. One of the railroad men shifts uncomfortably. What you are suggesting is not conventional. You lean forward, your eyes intense. Neither is what we are offering. Stability, predictability in an unpredictable market. They agree. Of course, they agree. And just like that, you have tilted the playing field in your favor. With your shipping costs now dramatically lower than everyone else's, you can sell your kerosene for less than your competitors and still make a higher profit margin. It is only a matter of time before they start to crumble. But you are just getting started. While all this business maneuvering is happening, you have also settled into domestic life. In 1864, you married Laura Celestia Spellman, a woman who shared your Baptist faith and disciplined nature. By 1868, you have two children, with more to come. Despite your growing wealth, you live modestly. Your house in Cleveland is comfortable, but not ostentatious. You do not drink, smoke, or gamble. Your main indulgences are your church donations and the simple pleasure of playing with your children in the evenings. Should not we get a bigger house? Laura asks one evening, as you are reviewing your account books at the dining table. You could certainly afford it. You look up, considering. What we have is sufficient. Better to reinvest the money where it can grow. She smiles slightly. Always the businessman. Always you agree. This is something that always gets me about Rockefeller. The guy was becoming insanely wealthy. But he lived like a middle-class minister. No flash, no extravagance. Every penny was accounted for, every expenditure questioned. He was building an empire with the discipline of a monk. Back at Standard Oil, your strategy is working better than even you expected. The lower prices you are able to offer are putting immense pressure on your competitors. Some are already approaching you about selling out. But then something happens that threatens to derail everything. The discovery of massive new oil fields in Pennsylvania. Suddenly, there is so much crude oil on the market that prices collapse. Oil that was selling for $4 a barrel now goes for $2.40, and many predict it will fall even further. Your competitors are panicking. Nearly 90% of oil refiners are losing money. You and Flagler, however, see this as the perfect storm. A chance to consolidate the industry even faster than you had planned. Most of these refineries are operating at a loss, Flagler points out, reviewing the industry reports. They are desperate, which makes them cheap to acquire. You finish his thought. One evening in late 1871, you are working late at your office. The lamp casts long shadows as you methodically update your ledger. There is a knock at the door. It is Tom Scott, president of the Pennsylvania Railroad, the one major railroad you do not have a deal with. Mr. Rockefeller, he says, removing his hat, I believe we have mutual interests to discuss. Scott proposes something even more ambitious than your previous railroad deals, a secret alley. Ants between the largest railroads and a select group of the largest refiners, with Standard Oil at the center. They call it the South Improvement Company, or SIC for short. Under this arrangement, Standard Oil would not only receive a 50% rebate on transportation costs, but would also collect a payment called a drawback on the shipments of any competitors who were not part of the alliance. Let that sink in for a moment. Your competitors would be paying full price to ship their oil, and then the railroad would give you a portion of that money. It was as if Burger King had to pay MC Donald's a fee every time they sold a Whopper. You were even promised detailed information about your competitors' shipments, how much they were shipping, where it was going, who they were selling to. This was no longer just business. This was warfare. The South Improvement Company deal would effectively give you a stranglehold on the entire industry. Anyone outside the alliance would be squeezed to death by higher shipping rates and the invisible tax they were paying to you. "It solves our problems at a stroke," Flagler said excitedly after Scott left. "The entire industry stabilized under our control." You nodded slowly. "It is perfect, too perfect, perhaps." Your caution was justified. By early 1872, rumors of the alliance began to spread. When people read in the newspapers that shipping rates for the three most important railroads had doubled overnight, they knew exactly who to blame. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Thousands took to the streets in protest. Oil producers in the Pennsylvania oil regions organized a boycott of any refinery suspected of being part of the South Improvement Company. Without a supply of crude oil, your refineries were useless. After just 2 months, the South Improvement Company was disbanded, a public relations disaster. But here is the thing. Even though the SIC failed, the mere rumor of its existence created a panic in the industry. Everyone asked. UMED Standard Oil still had secret deals with the railroads, whether true or not. And you decided to use that fear to your advantage. In a period of just 6 weeks, known later as the Cleveland Massacre, you approached 22 of the 26 oil refining companies in Cleveland and gave them an ultimatum: sell to Standard Oil or be crushed. You walked into each competitor's office with the same offer. Standard Oil would buy them out, paying not in cash but in Standard Oil stock. The alternative was to face Standard's lower prices, superior technology, and perceived railroad advantages. "Mr. Rockefeller is here to see you," the secretary announced, and the refinery owner's face went pale. You entered, hat in hand, the picture of politeness. "Good afternoon. I think you know why I am here." The refinery owner, a man named Reynolds, whom you had known for years, gestured to a chair. "John, let us not dance around it. You are buying everyone up. Consolidation is the future," you said calmly. "This industry cannot survive with dozens of small refineries undercutting each other." Reynolds laughed bitterly. "So instead, one big refinery will undercut us all until we are gone." You opened your briefcase and removed some papers. "I am prepared to offer you $45,000 for your refinery, paid in Standard Oil stock." Reynolds's eyes widened. His refinery was worth at least $150,000. "That is robbery. That is the future," you corrected him. "Your refinery is losing money every day. How long can you keep operating at a loss? 6 months? A year? And what will your refinery be worth then?" You slid the papers across his desk. "Standard Oil stock, on the other hand, will only increase in value as we grow." Reynolds stared at the papers for a long moment. "And if I refuse?" Your expression did not change. "Then we wish you the best of luck competing in the new market. We do not know exactly what went down in these meetings, but we do know the results. Wit. In those 6 weeks, 22 out of the 26 refineries in Cleveland sold to Standard Oil, most for a fraction of their actual value. Whenever anyone sold out, you gave them only 2 options: sign a contract prohibiting them from ever re-entering the oil business, or join Standard Oil as an employee or partner. Many chose to join, which meant you now had the brightest minds in the industry working for you instead of against you. By mid-1872, you had achieved something unprecedented. Standard Oil now controlled 85% of Cleveland's oil refining capacity. You had gone from 1 refinery to 22 in less than 3 months. The funniest part about all this? John was only 33 years old. While most guys his age were still figuring out what to do with their lives, he had already built the foundation of one of the greatest business empires in history. But just as you were consolidating your Cleveland dominance, disaster struck. On September 18, 1873, a financial panic hit Wall Street. The stock market collapsed. Banks failed across the country. The American economy plunged into a depression that would last 6 years. For the first time, oil prices dropped not because of oversupply, but because of collapsing demand. Standard Oil had to temporarily shut down all but 2 of its Cleveland refineries. By 1874, a single barrel of oil was trading for just 48 cents, less than the cost of the wooden barrel it was stored in. It seemed like the entire industry might collapse. But unlike your competitors, Standard Oil had carefully managed finances, excellent credit with banks, and modernized, efficient refineries. Even in these bleak conditions, you were still able to operate at a small profit while others bled money. And, as always, you saw opportunity in crisis. You called Flagler into your office one cold January morning in 1874. The streets of Cleveland were nearly empty. Businesses were closed or operating at reduced hours. The Depression had left the city, like much of America, in a state of economic paralysis. "Henry," you said, spreading a map on your desk, "it is time to expand." Flagler looked at you like you had lost your mind. "Expand now?" In the middle of a depression, you traced your finger across the map, touching Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York. Everyone is struggling. Refineries in these cities are operating at a loss, burning through their reserves just to stay alive, which means they are cheap. Flagler nodded slowly, beginning to understand. "Exactly," you said. "We have conquered Cleveland. Now, we take the rest." And that is exactly what you did. You initiated a nationwide buyout campaign. Whenever anyone was reluctant to sell, you resorted to the same indirect tactics that had worked in Cleveland. You bought up all the available barrels so competitors could not package their oil. You reserved all available railroad capacity so they could not ship their product. You used your railroad connections to get their shipping rates raised to ruinous levels. Then, when they were on the verge of bankruptcy, you swooped in with an offer to save them, by buying them out at a steep discount, of course. Picture this scene. A small refinery owner in Pittsburgh sitting in his cold office. It had been weeks since he had received a shipment of barrels for his refined oil. His workers were idle. The banks would not extend more credit. His wife had already pawned her jewelry to keep the business afloat. Then, you walked in, impeccably dressed, despite the economic depression. Calm. Confident. "I understand you are having some difficulties," you said, removing your gloves. The refinery owner looked up, his face haggard. "You engineered those difficulties. You did not deny it. I have come with a solution." By the time the Depression began to lift in the late 1870s, Standard Oil controlled over half of Pittsburgh's refining capacity, the largest refineries in Philadelphia, and had secured a dominant position in New York as well. To further strengthen your grip on the industry, you began building a network of pipelines to transport oil. These pipelines reduced your reliance on the railroads and further lowered your costs. With these pipelines stretching across the eastern United States like tentacles, Standard Oil earned a new nickname among its enemies, the Octopus. And you, John D. Rockefeller, were only just beginning. By your late 30s, you were already one of the wealthiest men in America, and you had laid the groundwork for a monopoly that would soon control 90% of the oil refining in the entire country. The ruthless tactics that built this empire had made you many enemies. The largest newspaper in America called Standard Oil the most cruel, impudent, pitiless, and grasping monopoly that ever fastened upon a country. But in your mind, you were bringing order to chaos, stability to volatility. You were not destroying the oil industry. You were saving it from itself. You stood at your office window watching the snow fall on Cleveland. Your competitors feared you. The public was beginning to hate you, but you were convinced that what you were doing was not just good business. It was your divine calling. Mr. Rockefeller, your secretary interrupted your thoughts. "Mr. Flagler needs to see you immediately. There is a situation with the Pennsylvania Railroad." You turned from the window, straightening your jacket. "Tell him I will be right there." The battle for complete control of America's oil industry was about to enter its most vicious phase, and at its center stood you, the quiet, religious man who treated business like war. The clock on your office wall showed nearly midnight. You were still at your desk, lamplight casting shadows across the papers spread before you. It was 1877, and the conflict with the Pennsylvania Railroad had reached a breaking point. You tapped your pencil against the ledger. For years, the railroads had been essential to your business. Now they were becoming a liability. Mr. Rockefeller, your assistant knocked softly. Mr. Flagler asked me to give you this. He handed you a telegram. Tom Scott, president of the Pennsylvania Railroad, had done something unforgivable. He had started building his own oil refineries. So, you said quietly, folding the telegram. War it is. For the railroad companies, the oil industry had been a tremendous source of business. But, as Standard Oil began laying its vast network of pipelines, the railroads faced the terrifying prospect that their most important customer was making them obsolete. So Tom Scott decided to fight back by entering the oil business himself. Bad move. You gathered your top executives the next morning. The room was tense, faces grim. These men understood what was at stake. Gentlemen, you said, your voice mild as ever. The Pennsylvania Railroad has declared war on Standard Oil. They have chosen to compete with us directly. Flagler leaned forward. What do you propose? John? You smiled slightly. We are going to crush them. I am not exaggerating when I say what happened next was one of the most brutal corporate battles in American history. Rockefeller launched what was essentially a three-pronged attack. First, Standard Oil cancelled all shipments with the Pennsylvania Railroad and redirected them to their competitors. Second, Standard lowered the price of kerosene so dramatically that the Pennsylvania's new refineries could not possibly make a profit. Third, and this was the killer, Standard convinced the New York Central and Erie railroads to lower their shipping fees to ridiculous levels, purely to bleed the Pennsylvania Railroad dry. The Pennsylvania Railroad was forced to make an impossible choice: either match these rock-bottom rates and lose money on every shipment, or maintain their prices and watch their customers flee to cheaper competitors. Tom Scott was trapped, and he knew it. He was literally paying refineries to use his railroad just to maintain some semblance of market share. But the consequences of this corporate war spread far beyond just Standard Oil and the Pennsylvania Railroad. The B&O Railroad, another major line, also had to slash their rates and lay off workers to compete. And here is where things get really dark. In July 1877, with wages cut by 20% and workers being laid off by the hundreds, railroad employees across the country went on strike. It turned violent almost immediately. Have you seen the papers? Flagler burst into your office one morning, his face pale. You looked up calmly. I have. The headlines screamed about riots in Pittsburgh. Strikers had torched Pennsylvania Railroad property. 500 freight cars, 120 locomotives, and 27 buildings were now smoldering ruins. Dozens were dead. And while you did not directly cause this violence, your business tactics helped set the stage for it. Flagler paced nervously. This is getting out of hand, John. Perhaps we should ease the pressure. But you saw an opportunity even in this chaos. The Pennsylvania Railroad is more vulnerable than ever. Now is not the time to relent, you said. Now is the time to end this. A few days later, Tom Scott, once the titan of the railroad industry, sent a representative to your office. The Pennsylvania Railroad was ready to surrender. You orchestrated a massive deal with all the major railroads. Standard Oil would give the Pennsylvania Railroad 47% of its shipping business. The New York Central, the Erie, and the B&O would share the rest. In exchange, you demanded a very large secret rebate on the Pennsylvania's rates, detailed information about competitors' shipments, and 20 cents for every barrel that passed through any of the railroads. The railroads had no choice but to agree. By 1879, Standard Oil effectively controlled the entire oil industry and had tremendous influence over the railroads as well. But there was an unexpected consequence of your victory. Tom Scott, broken by his defeat, suffered a stroke shortly after the deal was signed. He died within a year. And this created a powerful enemy for you. Scott had been a mentor to a young Andrew Carnegie, who was now the dominant force in the American steel industry. Carnegie blamed you for Scott's death and vowed revenge. The king of oil versus the king of steel. Two of the wealthiest, most powerful men in America, now locked in a bitter personal rivalry. Carnegie once reportedly said of you, Rockefeller is the only man who makes me uncomfortable when he enters a room. You felt similarly about him. Carnegie reminds me of myself. You once said, "Only he lacks balance." Despite all this corporate warfare, your personal life remained remarkably stable and modest. You moved your family to New York City in the late 1870s, but rather than building some grandiose mansion, you purchased a comfortable but unpretentious home. Your daily routine was almost monastic in its discipline. Line. You woke early, spent time in prayer and Bible reading, ate a simple breakfast, and then headed to your office. You did not drink, smoke, or engage in the extravagant social life that consumed many of New York's elite. Your favorite pastime was simply playing with your children in the evenings. One of your employees once remarked that you would rather be down on all fours with your children than at the most elegant dinner in New York. This strange contrast between your ruthless business practices and your gentle family life puzzled many. But in your mind, there was no contradiction. Business was business. Family was sacred. And despite your growing notoriety, you continued to donate at least 10% of your income to religious and charitable causes, a practice you had maintained since you received your very first paycheck. Back at Standard Oil, you were now focusing on vertical integration. Until this point, you had primarily pursued horizontal integration, taking over company participants who did the same thing you did. Now, you wanted to control every step of the supply chain, from oil wells to refineries to transportation, storage, and retail. This was not just about greed. It was about control, about building a system so perfectly integrated that nothing was left to chance. In 1885, a massive new oil field was discovered in Lima, Ohio. It seemed like a blessing at first. More oil meant more business for Standard. But there was a problem. It smells like a skunk died in a barrel of rotten eggs, your chief chemist explained, wrinkling his nose at a sample of the Ohio oil. Even after refining, this skunk oil, as it was called, had such a high sulfur content that it was practically worthless. It traded for as little as 15 cents per barrel because no one wanted to buy kerosene that made their house smell like death. Most refiners gave up on the Ohio oil fields immediately. Not you. Find a way to remove the sulfur, you told your team of chemists. Whatever IT costs. For almost a year, they worked on the problem. Finally, they developed a process to remove the sulfur, making the oil usable. Standard Oil was suddenly the only company able to profitably refine and sell this cheaper form of oil. This gave you a massive advantage when, a few years later, oil began to be discovered in massive quantities throughout the Midwest and Southwest, in Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, and California. And this tied into another major development, the rise of the automobile. As cars began to replace horse-drawn carriages, the demand for gasoline, previously considered a waste product of the refining process, skyrocketed. Once again, your foresight paid off spectacularly. While others were focused solely on kerosene for lamps, you had built an empire that was perfectly positioned to fuel the automotive revolution. By the 1890s, Standard Oil controlled approximately 90% of all oil refineries and pipelines in the United States. Your personal wealth had grown, owned to unimaginable levels. And yet, the larger Standard Oil grew, the more enemies it created. Small businessmen crushed by your tactics, politicians offended by your power, journalists outraged by your monopolistic practices. You started to take a more hands-off approach to the daily operations of Standard Oil, delegating more responsibilities to trusted lieutenants. Part of this was strategic. By distancing yourself personally from some of the company's more aggressive tactics, you created a buffer between yourself and public criticism. But it was also practical. The empire had grown too vast for any one person to manage directly. Standard Oil now had operations in multiple states and countries, thousands of employees, and a dizzying array of subsidiaries and associated companies. "Mr. Rockefeller seems tired today," one of your secretaries whispered to another as you passed by. You pretended not to hear, but it was true. You were approaching 50, the stress of building and defending. Your empire was taking its toll. You had developed digestive problems, and your hair had fallen out completely. Despite being one of the richest men in the world, you now subsisted primarily on crackers, milk, and a few simple vegetables, all your stomach could handle. But even as your personal involvement in day-to-day operations decreased, your wealth continued to grow at an astonishing rate. With Standard Oil's near total dominance of the oil industry and the increasing importance of oil in the American economy, money flowed into your coffers in ever-increasing amounts. You began to think more seriously about how to manage this vast fortune. For a man as methodical as you, simply piling up wealth for its own sake was not satisfying. There must be a purpose, a plan, a system. That was when you hired Frederick Gates, a Baptist minister, to help you manage your philanthropic activities. It was an unconventional choice, a minister rather than a financial expert, but it proved to be Br. Eliante. Years later, when asked who the greatest businessman you ever met was, you would point to Frederick Gates. Gates helped you organize your charitable giving and made strategic investments that grew your non-oil wealth substantially. He also served as a mentor to your son, John D. Rockefeller Jr., who was now finishing his education at Brown University. Together, Gates and Jr. began to transform your haphazard personal investments into a systematic portfolio that would eventually multiply your fortune far beyond what even Standard Oil could generate. One of their most significant investments was in iron ore. On Gates's advice, you purchased vast tracts of the Mesabi Range in Minnesota, which contained some of the richest iron deposits in North America. This put you on a collision course with Andrew Carnegie, who needed iron ore for his steel mills. A rumor spread that you were planning to build your own steel mill to compete directly with Carnegie. It was not true, at least not yet. But the mere possibility terrified Carnegie. Mr. Rockefeller, your secretary interrupted your thoughts one afternoon. Mr. Carnegie's representative is here to see you. The meeting that followed led to one of the most lucrative deals in American business history. Carnegie agreed to buy a minimum of 600,000 tons of ore from your mines every year and to transport it exclusively through your railroads. In exchange, you agreed never to enter the steel business, and Carnegie got a secret rebate on the ore. Ironically, similar to the railroad rebates that helped you build Standard Oil. The deal was so profitable for both of you that a wall of silence descended around it. Neither of you wanted competitors or the government to know just how much money you were making. But someone else had noticed the immense potential of this partnership. J.P. Morgan, the most powerful banker in America. Morgan saw an opportunity to create something even bigger than Carnegie Steel or Standard Oil. He envisioned a steel monopoly that combined Carnegie's mills with your iron ore mines and several other major steel companies. One winter morning in 1901, Morgan sent a representative to meet with you. Mr. Morgan would like to discuss the purchase of your Mesabi Range holdings, the man said. You surprised him by replying, "He should speak with my son about that." Morgan was initially dismissive of having to negotiate with your 27-year-old son. He assumed Junior would be an easy mark. But when Morgan met with Junior and bluntly asked, "What is your price?" Junior was not intimidated. "Mr. Morgan," he said calmly, "I think there must be some mistake. I did not come here to sell. I understood you wished to buy." By insisting that Morgan name the price first, Junior gained the upper hand in the negotiations. Morgan, taken aback by the young man's composure, had to reconsider his approach. Eventually, Morgan offered $88.5 million in U.S. steel stock for your iron ore holdings, the equivalent of over $3 billion today. You accepted. U.S. Steel became the first billion-dollar corporation in American history, and you now owned a substantial portion of it. While all this was happening, Standard Oil continued to grow more powerful and more profitable. The rise of the automobile had turned gasoline from a waste product into liquid gold. Your empire now spanned the globe, with operations in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. But, as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, a new threat emerged. The progressive movement, led by journalists and politicians determined to break the power of monopolies, set its sights on Standard Oil. They called men like you robber barons, industrial monarchs who had built empires through questionable means. The press portrayed you as a cold, calculating villain who crushed smaller businesses without remorse. The irony was that as these attacks intensified, you were actually less and less involved in the day-to-day operations of Standard Oil. You were in your 60s now, in semi-retirement, focused more on your philanthropic activities than on business. But to the public, you were Standard Oil, and Standard Oil was increasingly seen as the enemy of the common man. One evening, you were sitting in your library reading the latest newspaper articles about yourself. They were not flattering. Father Junior entered the room, concern on his face. "Have you seen what they are saying?" You folded the newspaper calmly. "I have. Does it not bother you?" he asked. You considered the question for a moment. The public will form its judgment. If that judgment is just, I have nothing to fear. If it is unjust, you shrugged. Well, I have faced worse. But privately, you were concerned. The political winds were shifting. There was talk of new antitrust legislation, of presidential candidates promising to break up monopolies, like Standard Oil. And there was one journalist in particular, whose work was causing you significant discomfort. Ida Tarbell. Tarbell's father had been one of the independent oil refiners, who went bankrupt during Standard Oil's rise to power. Now she was writing a devastating exposé of your business practices, publishing it in monthly installments, that the American public devoured eagerly. What made Tarbell's work so damaging was that it was meticulously researched. She was not just slinging mud, she was revealing actual documents, testimony from former Standard Oil employees, details of secret deals, and strong-arm tactics that had previously been hidden from public view. Your policy was never to respond directly to critics, so Tarbell's accusations went unchallenged. This only seemed to validate them in the public's mind. As the new century dawned, you found yourself in an unusual position. You were wealthier than you had ever been, with your fortune growing daily. You controlled, directly or indirectly, a significant portion of the American economy. And yet, your public image had never been worse. Presidents Theodore Roosevelt and William Howard Taft both made breaking up Standard Oil a key part of their political agendas. The Sherman Antitrust Act, previously seldom enforced, was now being wielded against your company. The legal battles began, and they would stretch on for years. Standard Oil fought in court after court, winning some cases, losing others, but always facing more legal challenges. You watched these developments with growing detachment. Your son and Frederick Gates were increasingly handling both your business and philanthropic affairs. Your health was fragile. You spent more time at your estates in New York and Florida, trying to recover your strength. "Sir," your butler interrupted your breakfast one morning in 1909. "There is a telephone. One call for you." "It is Mr. Gates." You picked up the receiver. "Yes, Frederick?" "John," Gates said, his voice tense. "The Supreme Court has agreed to hear the government's case against Standard Oil." You were silent for a moment. The Supreme Court, the final arbiter. After this, there would be nowhere else to appeal. "I see," you said finally. "Keep me informed." You hung up and returned to your breakfast, your face betraying no emotion. But inside, you knew that the empire you had spent your life building was facing its greatest threat yet. The stage was set for the most significant antitrust case in American history. The outcome would not only determine the fate of Standard Oil but would reshape the entire American business landscape for generations to come. And all of this from the boy who once followed a turkey into the woods to steal its eggs. The morning sun streamed through the windows of your mansion at Pocantico Hills, your estate north of New York City. It was 1910, and at 71 years old, you had grown accustomed to a certain routine. Wake before dawn, light stretching, a simple breakfast of toast, milk and fruit, reading the Bible, prayer. But today, there was a tension in your body that the familiar routine could not quite dispel. "Sir," your butler said, entering with the morning newspaper. "I thought you might want to see this immediately." The headline screamed across the front page. "Supreme Court to rule on Standard Oil case tomorrow." You took the paper with a steady hand, though your heart rate picked up slightly. Tomorrow. After years of legal battles, it all came down to tomorrow. Will you be going into the city today, sir? The butler asked. You considered for a moment. Number, I think I will play golf instead. This was not a joke. On the day before the Supreme Court decided the fate of Standard Oil, Rockefeller actually went golfing. The man had ice in his veins. As your chauffeur drove you to the golf course, you gazed out at the Hudson River. The Standard Oil case had been winding through the courts for years now. President Theodore Roosevelt, who called men like you malefactors of great wealth, had made breaking up your company a personal crusade. The government's lawsuit alleged that Standard Oil had violated the Sherman Antitrust Act by monopolizing the oil industry and restraining trade. The evidence against you was substantial. Records of railroad rebates, predatory pricing, corporate espionage, and secret ownership of supposedly independent competitors. Your lawyers had fought brilliantly at every turn, but you had known for some time that the tide of public and political opinion had turned against you, against monopolies in general. At the golf course, your regular partners were waiting. Wealthy men like yourself, though none quite as wealthy. Big day tomorrow, John, one said as you approached. You smiled pleasantly. Every day is a big day when the Lord grants you the health to enjoy it. They exchanged glances. Your calm in the face of potential disaster was unnerving. Are you not worried? Another asked incredulously. You selected a club, considering. Worry never solved anything. The Supreme Court will decide as it will. I have done my work. Now it is in God's hands. The funny thing was, you meant it. This was not just a show for your golf partners. Rockefeller had this almost eerie acceptance of things beyond his control. He had spent decades building Standard Oil with meticulous planning and ruthless execution. But once something was truly out of his hands, he had this ability to just let it go. The next morning, you were having breakfast when the telephone rang. It was Frederick Gates. John, he said, his voice tight with tension. The court has ruled. You set down your spoon carefully. Go on. They have ordered Standard Oil to be dissolved, broken into separate companies within 6 months. There was a long pause. Gates was clearly waiting for an explosion of anger, despair, something, but the seconds tickle. By in silence. John, are you there? Yes, you said calmly. Thank you for letting me know. You hung up the phone and returned to your breakfast. On May 15, 1911, the Supreme Court found Standard Oil guilty of monopolizing the oil industry through illegal business practices. The court ordered the company to be split into 34 separate entities, each with its own board of directors. After 41 years, your empire had been dealt what appeared to be a fatal blow. That afternoon, reporters gathered outside your estate, hoping for a comment. You rarely spoke to the press, but today you decided to make an exception. You stepped out onto the porch, immaculately dressed as always, your bald head gleaming in the spring sunshine. Mr. Rockefeller, one reporter called out, what is your reaction to the Supreme Court's decision? You smiled slightly. I have nothing to say, sir. They have ordered Standard Oil to be broken up. Does that upset you? You regarded them for a moment. Have a pleasant day, gentlemen. And with that, you turned and went back inside, leaving them baffled by your apparent indifference. The truth was more complicated. The Supreme Court's decision was certainly not what you wanted. The company you had built from nothing, the enterprise you had crafted with such care and protected so fiercely, was to be dismantled. But there was an irony here that few people understood yet. By forcing Standard Oil to break up into dozens of smaller companies, the government may have actually done you a massive financial favor. See, the thing about monopolies is they are often undervalued by the market. Because they are seen as risky, precisely due to potential antitrust action, their stock prices do not always reflect their true worth. But when you break a monopoly into smaller, more focused companies, those new entities can sometimes be valued much higher collectively than the original monopoly was. You still owned about a quarter of Standard Oil's stock when The company split into 34 different companies. You would get your proportional share in each of them. And once those companies were open to public trading, without the shadow of monopoly accusations hanging over them, well, the market might have some surprises in store. 3 months after the Supreme Court's decision, you were sitting in your library with Frederick Gates and Jr., reviewing the latest financial reports. "This cannot be right," Jr. said, frowning at the papers. Gates smiled slightly. "I have checked the figures 3 times. They are accurate." You leaned back in your chair, a hint of amusement in your eyes. "So breaking up Standard Oil has made us richer, significantly richer," Gates confirmed. "The combined value of your holdings in the successor companies has almost tripled since the breakup was announced." The stock market had reacted to the breakup by driving up the value of the newly independent companies. Investors were excited about the potential of these focus-used, efficient businesses, freed from the legal troubles that had plagued Standard Oil. The government's attempt to punish you had instead made you wealthier than ever. By the end of 1911, your net worth was approaching $900 million, the equivalent of about $25 billion today, adjusted for inflation, and it was still growing. You were closing in on becoming the world's first billionaire. The next day, you were having lunch with Junior at your city residence. He was 37 now, a serious man with a strong sense of responsibility. "Father," he said, setting down his fork, "what do you intend to do now?" You looked at him questioningly. "About the money," he clarified. "It just keeps growing, even after the breakup. Something needs to be done with it." You nodded slowly. This had been on your mind as well. For years, you had been giving substantial sums to various charities and educational institutions, but your wealth was increasing faster than you could give. It away through these traditional channels. "I have been thinking," you said, "about establishing a foundation, something permanent, something that will continue the work long after I am gone." Junior's eyes lit up. This was clearly an idea that resonated with him. "What sort of work specifically?" "The root causes," you said. "Not just treating symptoms of society's ills, but addressing their sources: education, medical research, public health." This was actually a pretty revolutionary idea for the time. Most wealthy people gave to charity, sure, but usually in a scattered, reactive way. Rockefeller was proposing something much more systematic and forward-looking. 2 years later, in 1913, the Rockefeller Foundation was officially established with an initial endowment of $100 million, over $2.6 billion, in today's money. Its mission was ambitious: to promote the well-being of mankind throughout the world. You appointed Junior and Frederick Gates to lead the foundation. Dacian, with a board of distinguished scientists, educators, and public health experts to guide its work. "Sir," your secretary interrupted one afternoon. "Dr. Welch is here to see you. Dr. William Welch, a prominent physician and one of the directors of your foundation, entered your office with an air of excitement. "Mr. Rockefeller," he said, "I believe we have found a promising direction for our medical research funding." He proceeded to tell you about hookworm disease, a parasitic infection that affected millions of people, particularly in the American South. The disease caused anemia, weakness, and developmental problems in children. "The wonderful thing," Welch explained, leaning forward eagerly, "is that we know how to prevent and treat it. It is not like cancer or tuberculosis, where the medical science is still developing. With hookworm, we know what to do. We just need the resources to do it on a large scale." You listened carefully, asking occasional questions about costs, logistics, and expected outcomes. This was exactly the kind of project you had been looking for, one where a strategic investment could make a dramatic difference. "Draft a proposal," you said finally. "Let us make this happen." The Rockefeller Sanitary Commission for the Eradication of Hookworm Disease became one of your foundation's first major initiatives. Within a few years, it dramatically reduced the incidence of hookworm in the southern United States and established a model for future public health campaigns around the world. This was just the beginning. The Rockefeller Foundation went on to fund the development of the yellow fever vaccine, establish the first schools of public health, modernize medical education, and support agricultural improvements that would eventually help feed millions. Your approach to philanthropy was the same as your approach to business: methodical, strategic, focused on maximum impact. You were not interested in having buildings named after you or receiving see accolades. You wanted results. Mr. Rockefeller, a reporter asked at a rare press conference, why are you giving away so much of your fortune? You considered the question. God gave me my money, you said simply. I believe the power to make money is a gift from God, to be developed and used to the best of our ability for the good of mankind. Despite your increasing focus on philanthropy, your wealth continued to grow at an astonishing rate. The successor companies to Standard Oil were thriving in the new automobile-centered economy. Your investments in mining, railroads, and banking were generating enormous returns. By 1916, you had achieved what no one in history had achieved before. Your net worth passed $1 billion. You were the world's first billionaire. To put this in perspective, your wealth represented about 2% of the entire U.S. economy. Adjusted for GDP, that would be equivalent to around $450 billion today, making you more than twice as rich as anyone currently living. But money meant less and less to you personally. Your lifestyle remained relatively modest. You did not collect art, yachts, or palatial homes around the world. Your pleasures were simple: family, golf, and watching your philanthropic work bear fruit. Father, Junior said one evening as you sat together in your library, I have been thinking about the future of our philanthropic work. Go on, you encouraged. The foundation is doing excellent work globally, but I wonder if we should consider something more focused on individual development. Education, perhaps, but in a different way than the universities we have funded. Junior went on to outline his idea for what would eventually become the General Education Board, focused on improving education at all levels, particularly for disadvantaged communities. You listened attentively, nodding occasionally. Junior had increasingly taken over the management of both your business and philanthropic interests. He had proven himself to be thoughtful, strategic, and deeply committed to using wealth for the public good. You have given this a lot of thought, you said when he finished. He smiled slightly. I had a good teacher. Junior was not just flattering you. Despite your reputation as a ruthless businessman, you had always been meticulous about education, both your own and others. Throughout your career, you had studied constantly, learning every detail of the oil industry and then of finance and investment. I am considering a significant additional donation to the foundation, you told him. Perhaps another 100 million. Junior's eyebrows rose. Even for you? That was an enormous sum. Are you sure? He asked. That would bring your total giving to over $500 million. You nodded. Money is like manure. It is not worth a thing unless it is spread around, encouraging young things to grow. This was one of Rockefeller's actual sayings. By the way, the guy had a weird thing for farming. Metaphors. The next day, you were walking through your garden with your grandchildren. At 77, you still had remarkable energy, though your health had improved significantly since your partial retirement. Grandfather, one of the children asked, is it true you are the richest man in the world? You smiled down at her. I believe the richest person is the one who is content with what they have. She wrinkled her nose. That is not a real answer. You laughed, a surprisingly hearty sound from such a reserved man. No, I suppose it is not. You knelt down, slightly stiff, but determined to be at eye level with her. Yes. People say I have more money than anyone else, but that is not what matters. What matters is what you do with what you have, whether it is a little or a lot. And what are you doing with yours? She asked innocently. Trying to help people, you said simply. Trying to solve problems that make life harder than it needs to be. This was the great paradox of John D. Rockefeller. The man who had built his fortune through ruthless business tactics, who had crushed competitors without mercy and manipulated markets to his advantage, was also genuinely committed to using that fortune to improve the human condition. Was it guilt? Religious conviction? A desire to rehabilitate his public image? Probably some combination of all these factors, along with a sincere belief that wealth carried responsibility. As the First World War raged in Europe, your foundation focused on relief efforts, particularly in Belgium, where millions faced starvation under German occupation. You personally contributed millions to these efforts, working closely with future President Herbert Hoover, who was coordinating American relief work. The war accelerated the demand for oil products, particularly gasoline for military vehicles. The successor companies of Standard Oil saw their profits, and your wealth surged even higher. By 1918, as the war drew to a close, you were approaching 8 years old. Your health was surprisingly good for a man who had spent much of his middle age plagued by digestive problems and stress-related ailments. You attributed your longevity to a simple diet, regular exercise, and freedom from worry. Worry, you often told your grandchildren, never accomplished anything. In your sun-filled study at Pocantico Hills, you were reading through reports from the various foundations and institutions you had established. The Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, later Rockefeller University, was making breakthroughs in understanding infectious diseases. The General Education Board was transforming schools across America. The Rockefeller Foundation was extending its work globally. Frederick Gates entered with a new stack of papers. The latest reports from China, he said, placing them on your desk. The medical college in Beijing is making excellent progress. You nodded, pleased. Your philanthropic work had increasingly taken on a global dimension. You believed that advances in medicine, education, and agriculture should benefit all of humanity, not just Americans. And this, Gates added, handing you a newspaper, might interest you. It was an editorial criticizing your charitable giving as an attempt to whitewash your reputation and distract from how your fortune was made. You scanned it briefly, then set it aside without comment. Such criticisms were nothing new. Many saw your philanthropy as mere image rehabilitation, the robber baron trying to buy his way into heaven. But you had long since stopped concerning yourself with public opinion. Your focus now was on ensuring that the vast wealth you had accumulated would continue to serve humanity long after you were gone. Frederick, you said, looking up from the papers, I have been thinking about our work in medical research. Yes? I want to expand it significantly. There are diseases we can defeat in our lifetime, if we commit the resources. Gates smiled. After decades of West working together, he still marveled at your ambition. I will have the team draft some proposals. You nodded, satisfied. The empire you had built may have been dismantled, but your legacy was just beginning to take shape. As the sun set over the Hudson River, casting long shadows across your estate, you stood at the window, contemplating the journey that had brought you here. From the poor farm boy with a talent for numbers to the richest man in the world. From the ruthless architect of America's most powerful monopoly to one of history's greatest philanthropists. It had been a life of stark contrasts and apparent contradictions, but to you, there had always been a consistent thread. The application of method, discipline, and strategic thinking to whatever challenge was at hand. Whether building a business empire or solving global health problems, the boy who had once carefully raised turkeys to sell at market had become the man who carefully designed institutions to improve human life. On a planetary scale. And the story was far from over. The morning sun spilled through the windows of your Florida estate. It was 1920, and at 81 years old, you had developed a comfortable rhythm to your days. Breakfast with Laura, your wife, of 56 years, a few hours reviewing reports from your foundations, golf in the afternoon, dinner with family when they were visiting. Simple pleasures for a man who could buy practically anything. Your hands, spotted with age but still steady, sorted through the morning mail. Most of it was addressed to your office in New York, but some personal correspondence followed you to Florida. One envelope caught your eye. It was from a small Baptist church in Georgia. You opened it carefully. Inside was a letter from the minister thanking you for your recent donation that had saved their building from foreclosure. You smiled slightly. The donation was modest by your standards, just a few $1,000s, but it had meant everything to TH. at small congregation. These quiet, personal acts of charity still gave you more satisfaction than the millions you poured into your foundations. "John," Laura called from the sunroom, "are you joining me for coffee?" You tucked the letter into your pocket and joined your wife. Laura had been your constant companion since 1864. She had known you as a struggling young businessman, as the most feared industrialist in America, and now as the world's greatest philanthropist. Through it all, she had remained the same: practical, devout, unimpressed by wealth or fame. "What has you smiling this morning?" she asked, pouring you a cup of black coffee. You showed her the letter. She read it and nodded approvingly. "Sometimes I think these small gifts do more good than the big foundations," she said. "Perhaps," you replied. "But the foundations can tackle problems too large for small gifts." This was the dual nature of Rockefeller's philanthropy, the personal and the institutional. He gave away dimes and nickel sequels to people he met on the street, a habit that had earned him both affection and mockery, while simultaneously funding institutions that would transform medicine, education, and public health on a global scale. The telephone rang, interrupting your coffee. It was Frederick Gates calling from New York. "John," he said, his voice tense despite the crackling connection. "Have you seen the newspapers? The market is in trouble. The post-war boom is ending. The economy was showing signs of strain. Banks were failing in several states. It was not yet the Great Depression, but the warning signs were there. We should consolidate some of our positions," you said calmly. "Move more into government bonds." This was one advantage of your age and experience. You had seen financial panics before: 1873, 1893, 1907. You knew that markets rose and fell. You knew how to protect wealth through the cycles. "Junior is worried about the impact on our foundations if there is a prolonged downturn," Gates said. "Tell Junior not to worry," you replied. "The foundations have endowments large enough to weather any storm." After you hung up, you sat for a moment considering. Your son had essentially taken over management of your business and philanthropic affairs. He had done well, better than you had expected when he was a serious, somewhat sheltered young man entering Brown University. Junior lacked your killer instinct for business, but he had something perhaps more valuable for the task he had undertaken: a genuine, almost painful sense of responsibility to use the Rockefeller fortune for the greater good. A week later, you were back in New York for a board meeting of the Rockefeller Foundation. The discussion centered on expanding your international health programs. The success of the hookworm campaign had been remarkable. Dr. Rose, one of your medical directors, explained, "We have essentially eliminated the disease in the American South. Now we want to apply the same approach globally." You listen. D attentively as he outlined plans to combat malaria, yellow fever, and other infectious diseases across Latin America, the Caribbean, and parts of Asia and Africa. "The cost?" you asked when he finished. $25 million over 5 years, he answered promptly. Some of the board members shifted uncomfortably at the figure. It was an enormous sum, even for the Rockefeller Foundation. You nodded thoughtfully. "If the results will match those of the hookworm campaign, it is worth every penny." Junior, sitting beside you, smiled slightly. He knew you well enough to have anticipated your response. For all your reputation as a penny pincher in personal matters, you had never hesitated to invest heavily when you saw potential for significant returns, whether in business or philanthropy. After the meeting, you and Junior walked slowly through Central Park. Despite your age, you still enjoyed a good walk, though you tired more quickly than you once did. "Father," Junior said, "I have been thinking about creating a new venture, something focused on art and culture." You raised an eyebrow. Art had never been a particular interest of yours. Your taste ran to the practical, the useful. "Go on," you said. "I believe art and beauty are essential to human flourishing, just as health and education are," he explained. "I would like to establish a place in the city where art can be accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy. This idea would eventually become the Museum of Modern Art, founded in 1929, with significant Rockefeller support. It was one of many ways that Junior's vision for philanthropy expanded beyond your own, embracing culture, conservation, and historic preservation alongside your focus on health, science, and education. If you believe in it, you said after considering his proposal, then do it. You have both the resources and the judgment. Junior looked surprised, then pleased. Even in his 50s, your approval still mattered to him. Thank you, Father. Later that evening, Venning, you were at home in your study when your butler announced an unexpected visitor. Charles Evans Hughes, the newly appointed Secretary of State under President Harding and a former Supreme Court Justice. Mr. Rockefeller, Hughes said as he entered. Thank you for seeing me without an appointment. You gestured for him to sit. What can I do for you, Mr. Secretary? Hughes explained that the government was concerned about American access to oil in the Middle East, where British and French companies had secured most of the concessions following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire after World War I. We believe it is in America's national interest to have a presence in the region, Hughes said carefully, and we believe Standard Oil of New Jersey might be the appropriate vehicle for that presence. You found this ironic. The government that had broken up Standard Oil was now asking one of its successor companies to advance American interests abroad. I no longer control Standard of New Jersey. You reminded him. I am a shareholder, nothing more. Hughes smiled slightly. But your influence remains considerable, Mr. Rockefeller. A word from you would carry weight. You considered this. Though you had officially retired from business, you maintained connections throughout the oil industry. And despite your complicated relationship with the federal government, you were a patriot who believed in American leadership in the world. I will make some inquiries, you said, finally. No promises. Your influence did help pave the way for American oil companies to gain footholds in the Middle East, laying the groundwork for decades of U.S. involvement in the region. For better or worse, as the 1920s progressed, your public image began to soften. The fearsome monopolist was increasingly seen as a benevolent grandfather figure. Your practice of handing out dimes to children and adults alike became widely known. Photographers captured you playing golf, attending church, or spending time with our grandchildren. There was strategy in this shift, guided by one of America's first public relations experts, Ivy Lee, whom you had hired to help rehabilitate your image. But there was also truth to it. You were genuinely devoted to your family, your faith, and your philanthropic work. In 1925, you celebrated your 86th birthday. Gifts and congratulations poured in from around the world. President Coolidge sent his regards. The King of England sent a telegram. Former employees, business associates, and beneficiaries of your foundations sent letters by the thousands. All this fuss, you said to Lara as you looked over the correspondence, for an old man who just happened to live a long time. She gave you a knowing look. You know very well. It is not just for living a long time. You shrugged, uncomfortable as always with direct praise. Most of it is the work of the foundations now. Junior's work, not mine. The foundations would not exist without you, she pointed out. This was T. Rue. By this point, your total charitable giving had exceeded $500 million, the equivalent of tens of billions in today's money. The Rockefeller Foundation alone had an endowment of over $150 million and was active on 5 continents. The stock market crash of 1929 and the ensuing Great Depression tested even your immense fortune. The value of your investments dropped significantly, though you were insulated from the worst effects by your conservative financial management and diversified holdings. More importantly, the crash affected the endowments of your foundations. Income from investments declined just as the need for charitable work increased dramatically. You were 90 years old when the crash occurred. Many assumed you would reduce your giving in response. Instead, you did the opposite, increasing your personal donations to help offset the reduced income from endowments. Sir, your financial advisor protested when you instructed him to liquidate Sir. Tain investments to fund additional gifts. These market conditions are temporary. If you wait, your assets will recover their value. And how many will suffer while we wait? You asked. Number. We will give now, when the need is greatest. During these years, your relationship with Junior deepened and evolved. The somewhat distant father-son dynamic of earlier decades gave way to a partnership and friendship. You came to rely on his judgment not just in business and philanthropy, but in personal matters as well. When Laura, your wife of 61 years, passed away in 1915, it was Junior who helped you through the grief, who ensured that her funeral was exactly as she would have wanted it, who made sure you were not left alone in your mourning. She was very proud of you. Father, Junior told you as you sat together after the funeral, not for the money or the success, for the good you have done with it. You nodded, unable to speak. Laura had been your anchor, your counsel, your conscience. Her father, Eighth, had helped shape your own. Her practical nature had kept you grounded even as your wealth reached stratospheric levels. As the Depression deepened, you witnessed how your philanthropic institutions responded to the crisis. The Rockefeller Foundation funded emergency relief efforts. The General Education Board helped keep schools open despite plummeting tax revenues. The Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research continued its work, producing discoveries that would save countless lives. In 1934, your grandson Nelson, Jr.'s son, came to visit you at your Florida estate. He was 26, ambitious, energetic, with a keen interest in both business and public service. He reminded you somewhat of yourself at that age, though with advantages you had never had. "Grandfather," he said, sitting beside you on the veranda, "I have been offered a position in President Roosevelt's administration." This raised your eyebrows. The Rockefellers had traditionally been Republicans, and Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal represented a level of government intervention in the economy that made you deeply uncomfortable. "What position?" you asked. "Assistant Secretary of the Navy." You considered this. The Roosevelt family had a connection to the Navy Department. FDR himself had served as Assistant Secretary under Wilson. "And you want my advice?" you asked. Nelson nodded. "I do." You gazed out at the Atlantic Ocean visible in the distance. "The country is in crisis. If you believe you can help, then political differences should not stand in your way." Nelson took the position, beginning a long career in public service that would eventually lead him to the governorship of New York and the vice presidency of the United States. As you entered your 90s, your daily routine became more limited, but your mind remained sharp. You followed the news closely, particularly developments in science, medicine, and international affairs. You continued to receive regular reports from your foundations and provided guidance on major decisions. Your physical health, once so precarious, had actually improved with age and retirement from active business. The digestive problems that had plagued you in middle age had largely subsided. Your doctors attributed your longevity to your disciplined lifestyle, your abstention from alcohol and tobacco, and your remarkable freedom from worry. "Mr. Rockefeller," a reporter asked at a rare press conference on your 90th birthday, "what do you consider your greatest achievement?" You pondered the question for a moment. Was it building Standard Oil from nothing? Becoming the world's first billionaire? The millions of lives saved or improved through your philanthropy? "The ability to give," you said finally. "To earn money for the benefit of my fellow man." The reporter looked somewhat disappointed by this answer, perhaps expecting something more specific or dramatic. But it was the truth as you saw it. The wealth itself was never the goal. It was the means to an end. In 1936, as you approached your 90th birthday, you took stock of your life's work. Standard Oil, though broken up, had spawned companies that continued to dominate the global oil industry. Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, and others. Your personal fortune, despite enormous charitable giving and the effects of the Depression, still amounted to hundreds of millions of dollars. Your foundations were transforming health, education, and scientific research worldwide. And yet, public opinion about you remained deeply divided. To some, you were a visionary who had revolutionized industry. and then turned his talents to solving humanity's most pressing problems. To others, you were the ultimate robber baron, whose philanthropy could never fully atone for the ruthless business practices that had built your fortune. Perhaps both views contained elements of truth, the same strategic mind, the same relentless drive, the same attention to detail that had made you a feared competitor, or also made you an effective philanthropist. The same religious conviction that had justified your accumulation of wealth also compelled you to give it away. As the sun set over your Florida estate, you sat on the veranda wrapped in a light blanket, despite the warm evening. Junior sat beside you, the two of you comfortable in silence. "I received a letter from the foundation today," Junior said eventually. "The yellow fever vaccine has been successfully tested. They believe it will save thousands of lives, perhaps millions, eventually." You nodded, satisfied. Yellow fever had been a focus of your medical philanthropy for decades. "Good," you said simply. "Very good." The quiet moments stretched between you, filled with the sound of waves in the distance and the evening calls of birds. "Do you ever regret it?" Junior asked suddenly. "Any of it?" You knew what he was asking. The cutthroat tactics, the destroyed competitors, the political battles, the decades of public vilification. "Regret. It's a waste of energy," you said after a moment. "I did what I believed was right at the time." "As did I." Junior smiled slightly. It was not quite an answer, but it was very you. Practical, forward-looking, unwilling to dwell on the past. As darkness fell, you gazed up at the emerging stars, still amazed by the vastness of the universe despite all you had seen and done in your long life. From a struggling bookkeeper to the richest man in the world. From the architect of America's most powerful monopoly to its greatest philanthropist. It had been a journey of stark contrasts and apparent contradictions, but through it all, there had been a consistency of purpose, a methodical approach to every challenge, a deep conviction that wealth brought responsibility. The boy who had once said, "I am bound to be rich," could never have imagined just how rich he would become, or what he would ultimately do with that riches. Morning light filtered through the curtains of your bedroom at Ormond Beach, Florida. It was May 1937. At 97 years old, you had outlived almost everyone from your generation. The world had transformed beyond recognition since your birth in 1839. From horse-drawn carriages to automobiles, from whale oil lamps to electric lights, from a fractured nation fighting over slavery to a global power. Your nurse helped you sit up in bed. Your body had grown frailer, your movements more limited, but your mind remained remarkably clear. You could still recall details from business deals made 60 years ago, still follow the progress of your foundations, still recognize the faces of your great-grandchildren when they visited. "Good morning, Mr. Rockefeller," the nurse said cheerfully. "Would you like to sit on the veranda today?" "The weather is beautiful," you nodded. "For a while. Junior is visiting this afternoon. Your son, now in his 60s, still consulted you on major decisions regarding the family's business and philanthropic interests, though day-to-day man. Agement had long since passed from your hands. On the veranda, overlooking the lush Florida landscape, you sipped your morning tea and browsed through the latest reports from the Rockefeller Foundation. The yellow fever vaccine developed with your funding was being distributed throughout Latin America. New medical schools established with your grants were training doctors in China. Agricultural programs were increasing food production in Mexico. Your butler approached with a small stack of mail. "These arrived for you this morning, sir." You sorted through them slowly. A letter from a former employee, now elderly himself. A note from one of your great-grandchildren. And an envelope bearing the seal of the President of the United States. Inside was a personal letter from Franklin Roosevelt thanking you for your foundation's support of polio research. Roosevelt, crippled by the disease himself, had a personal stake in this work, though you and the President had significant political differences on this issue. You found common ground. "Mr. Rockefeller," your butler interrupted gently. "Dr. Haggard is here for your morning checkup." Dr. Haggard, your personal physician for the past decade, entered with his bag. He was a kind man in his 50s who had the difficult job of maintaining the health of someone approaching the century mark. "How are we feeling today?" he asked, taking your wrist to check your pulse. "Well enough," you replied, "though I seem to tire more easily." The doctor nodded. "That is to be expected, Mr. Rockefeller. But your heart sounds strong, and your blood pressure is remarkably good for a man of your age." After he left, you returned to the reports, but found your concentration waning. Your mind drifted to the past, not to the business battles or the political fights, but to simpler memories. Your mother teaching you to count pennies at the kitchen table, your first job as a bookkeeper, Laura on your wedding day, young and full of hope, your children when they were small. "Penny for your thoughts?" said a familiar voice. You looked up to see Junior standing at the entrance to the veranda. He had arrived earlier than expected. "Just remembering," you said, gesturing for him to sit. Your relationship with Junior had evolved over the decades. The somewhat stern father and bewildered son had become partners, then friends. You had come to respect not just his business acumen, but his vision for philanthropy, which in some ways had surpassed your own. The Foundation Board approved the new public health initiative for Africa, Junior told you, accepting a glass of lemonade from the butler. "Full funding for 5 years." You nodded approvingly. "Good. Very good. And the Museum of Modern Art expansion is proceeding on schedule," he continued. "Nelson is taking a particular interest in that project." Nelson, Junior's son and your grandson, had emerged as a force in both the business and cultural worlds. You saw in him some of your own drive and ambition, though directed toward different ends. "He has a good eye for art," Junior added, "though I cannot say I understand all of his modern tastes." This made you smile slightly. Art had never been your particular interest either. Your aesthetic ran to the practical, the functional. But you had come to appreciate Junior's belief that beauty and culture were as essential to human flourishing as health and education. "And how is the situation with Standard of California?" you asked, referring to one of the successor companies to your old empire. Junior's expression grew more serious. "The antitrust concerns are valid, I am afraid. They have grown too aggressive in their acquisitions." You sighed softly. The lessons of Standard Oil's breakup seemed to fade with each generation. The drive to dominate markets, to eliminate competition, to control rather than compete. It reasserted itself despite the legal guardrails put in place. "Remind them what happened to us," you said, better to a Jews. "Take course now than face dismemberment later." As the afternoon progressed, you and Junior discussed family matters, foundation business, and world affairs. The situation in Europe concerned you both. The rise of fascism in Germany and Italy, Japan's aggression in China. The world seemed to be sliding toward another great war. The Foundation should prepare, you told Junior. If war comes, there will be enormous needs, medical, humanitarian. Junior nodded. "We have already begun contingency planning." As the sun began to set, you felt fatigue settling over you. Junior noticed your energy flagging. "I should let you rest," he said, rising. "I will come back tomorrow." "Stay for dinner," you insisted. "Tell me about the grandchildren." Over a simple meal, Junior updated you on the expanding Rockefeller clan. Your grandchildren and great-grandchildren, their education, their interests, their promise. The family had grown too large for you to keep track of everyone, but you listened with genuine interest. The Rockefeller name, once associated primarily with corporate power and wealth, was increasingly linked to public service, philanthropy, and cultural patronage. Your descendants served in government, led charitable organizations, supported the arts, and, yes, continued to prosper in business. "David has a remarkable mind for banking," Junior said of his youngest son, your grandson. "Chase has grown significantly under his guidance." David Rockefeller, still in his early 40s, was already making his mark at Chase National Bank, which would eventually become Chase Manhattan, and then J.P. Morgan Chase, one of the world's largest financial institutions. "And Winthrop?" You asked about another grandson. Junior's expression was more measured. "Still finding his way. He has potential, but He trailed off diplomatically. Not every Rockefeller had your drive or Junior's sense of duty. Some struggled with the burden of the name and the expectations it carried. Some rebelled against the family's conservative traditions. Some simply preferred a quieter life away from public scrutiny. The money can be a curse, as well as a blessing, you observed. I have always believed that. It was something you had witnessed firsthand. Great wealth could distort values, destroy motivation, create a dangerous sense of entitlement. It was why you had raised your own children with strict discipline and modesty despite your vast fortune. After dinner, as Junior prepared to leave, you asked him to help you to your bedroom. The day had tired you more than usual. "Father," Junior said as he assisted you to your bed, "the University of Chicago is hoping you might attend the dedication of the new medical building next month. I told them I thought it unlikely given your health, but promised to ask. The University of Chicago, which you had founded in 1890 with an initial gift of $600,000, had become one of the world's premier research institutions. Your total contribution to it had exceeded $35 million over the decades. Send my regrets, you said, and my best wishes." Junior nodded, understanding. At 97, travel had become increasingly difficult for you. Your world had contracted to this estate in Florida, with occasional visits to your home in New York, when your health permitted. "Rest well," Junior said, squeezing your hand gently before departing. Alone in your room, you lay awake thinking about the remarkable journey of your life. From that poor farm boy in upstate New York to the richest man in the world. From the most feared businessman in America to one of its greatest philanthropists. Your mind drifted to a memory from childhood, following that wild turkey into the woods, finding its eggs, hatching them, raising the turkeys to sell. Your first entrepreneurial venture at just 6 years old, the beginning of a path that would lead to unimagined wealth and power. Was it all worth it? The battles, the criticism, the peril. Odds of illness brought on by stress, the newspaper cartoons depicting you as a monopolistic octopus, the congressional investigations, the Supreme Court's dismantling of your life's work. The answer was not simple. You had created tremendous wealth, not just for yourself, but for the American economy as a whole. You had revolutionized the oil industry, making kerosene and later gasoline affordable and widely available. You had established philanthropic institutions that had saved millions of lives and educated generations of students. But there had been costs as well. Competitors crushed without mercy. Political systems corrupted by corporate influence. Environmental damage from unregulated oil production. The concentration of economic power in ways that sometimes threatened democratic principles. History will have to judge the balance sheet of your life. All you know is that you tried to follow what you believed was right in business, in family life, in giving back. The next morning, you wake feeling unusually weak. Your nurse notices immediately. "I'll call Dr. Haggard," she says, concern evident in her voice. "No need to trouble him," you reply. "I'm just tired today, but the doctor is summoned anyway." After examining you, he takes Junior aside for a private conversation. You can't hear what they're saying, but their expressions tell you everything you need to know. Your time is approaching. Over the next few days, family members arrive from across the country. Your surviving children, your grandchildren, even some of your great-grandchildren. They gather around your bed, sharing memories, seeking wisdom, saying goodbye without explicitly acknowledging that's what they're doing. On May 23, 1937, you wake before dawn, as has been your habit for nearly a century. The pain in your chest is new, but not entirely unexpected. You've lived long enough to recognize the signs. "Get, Junior," you tell your nurse quietly, when your son arrives, his face etched with worry. You gesture for him to sit beside your bed. "I've been thinking about the foundation," you say, your voice weaker than before, but still clear. Junior leans closer. "Yes, Father." "The work isn't finished," you say. "It's only beginning." He nods, understanding what you're trying to tell him. The philanthropic institutions you've established together are not meant to solve all problems in your lifetime, or even his. They're designed to continue addressing human needs for generations to come. I'll make sure of it, he promises. You close your eyes, suddenly very tired. Good, you murmur. That's good. Later that day, surrounded by family, you slip away peacefully. John Davidson Rockefeller, the boy from the failing farm, the world's first billionaire, the great philanthropist, is gone at the age of 9. 7. The obituaries are extensive, filling pages in newspapers around the world. They chart the remarkable story of your life. From poverty to unimaginable wealth, from cutthroat businessman to generous benefactor, they struggle to reconcile the apparent contradictions of your character. The ruthless competitor and the devout Baptist, the penny-pinching accountant, and the man who gave away hundreds of millions. President Roosevelt issues a statement. The death of John D. Rockefeller removes from our national life a figure notable in industry, and notable, too, in the great philanthropic enterprises which his fortune made possible. The funeral is held at the Riverside Church in New York City, which you helped fund. The service is simple, befitting your Baptist faith. No elaborate eulogies, no excessive displays of grief, just scripture readings, hymns and prayers. Afterward, you're buried in the family mausoleum at Lakeview Cemetery in Cleveland, near where you built your first oil refiner. Why? But your story doesn't end with your death. In many ways, it's just beginning. The Rockefeller Foundation continues its global work in public health, scientific research, education, and humanitarian relief. During World War II, it funds refugee scholars fleeing Nazi persecution, supports medical care for displaced persons, and helps rebuild educational institutions destroyed in the conflict. After the war, the foundation plays a crucial role in the Green Revolution, developing and distributing high-yield crop varieties that prevent mass starvation in developing countries. It supports the development of vaccines for deadly diseases. It funds research that leads to breakthroughs in understanding human health and disease. The other institutions you established, the Rockefeller University, the General Education Board, the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, continue to advance human knowledge and well-being. The University of Chicago, which you founded, produces more Nobel Prize winners than almost any other institution in the world. The companies that emerged from the breakup of Standard Oil, Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, and others become some of the largest and most profitable corporations in global history. The antitrust action that seemed like a devastating blow to your empire ultimately increased its total value dramatically. Your descendants continue the family traditions of business success and philanthropy. They serve in government-led corporations, establish their own charitable foundations, support the arts, and engage in conservation efforts. The Rockefeller name becomes associated not just with wealth, but with public service. Your methods and motives continue to be debated by historians, economists, and ethicists. Were you a visionary who brought order to a chaotic industry and then used your wealth for humanity's benefit? Or a ruthless monopolist whose philanthropy was merely an attempt to whitewash a problematic legacy? Perhaps you were both. Perhaps. Applies the same qualities that made you successful in business, strategic thinking, relentless focus, and attention to detail also made you effective in philanthropy. Perhaps the religious convictions that justified your accumulation of wealth also compelled you to give it away. The contradictions and complexities of your character make you more interesting than either the cartoon villain or the sanitized hero. You were a man of your time who also transcended it, whose influence continues to shape the world long after your death. The boy who declared, "I'm bound to be rich," could never have imagined just how rich he would become, or how that richness would extend far beyond money to include impact, legacy, and meaning. If you enjoyed this journey through the life of John D. Rockefeller, from a poor farm boy to the world's first billionaire, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Oliver's Stories. It truly helps me keep creating these quiet explorations for you. Drop a company meant below and let me know where you are watching from and what time it is there. I love knowing who is drifting off with us across the world. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Now, sleep well, rest deeply, and may your dreams be richer than any fortune.